Right, so today I want to talk about this tweet from Kaz Najashian. Not sure how you pronounce that, but nonetheless, he says, imagine if Donald Trump fired Steve Mnuchin to distract the fact that Trump was caught funneling $1 billion taxpayer money to an organization that has paid Ivanka Trump. That's what Canada, or sorry, that's what just happened in Canada. Now, again, the first thing, like I say all the time, is that I really don't like having to talk about Justin Trudeau and the Liberals all the time, but because they are doing so much destruction to Canada, I have to talk about it. Anybody trying to throw out, oh, you're biased, all this garbage, yeah, just go watch CBC, go watch CNN. I really don't care because they'll fit the echo chamber just fine. If you don't want an echo chamber, yeah, I suggest you watch someone else, namely people like me. But nonetheless, yeah, this is the stuff that's going on in Canada right now, and the most frustrating thing about this, I think, is the fact that I don't think there's anything that Justin Trudeau and a lot of these liberals can do to to get voted out. Like I'm really the thing that's most concerning is that I think we may have a liberal government for a long time going forward in Canada. I mean a long time because I mean the Conservatives just elected O'Toole, which I don't think he's any better than Shear. If he is, I don't think it's enough to convince enough Canadians to vote Trudeau out. And I mean, I may be wrong. I mean, chances are the Liberals have another big, massive scandal within the next year, and maybe they're forced to have an election then because it's really not looking like the NDP are going to force an election. And that's the other reason why I think Canada is pretty much done for is that the next biggest leftist party doesn't have the enough of a spine to force an election. And I don't know, maybe that is a good thing because you'd think that if the NDP was confident, I mean, maybe it's that they're not confident in themselves, maybe, but that may point to the fact that they think that if they do force an election, the Conservatives would number one, they'd lose seats, and number two, the Liberals would lose seats, right? Because if they were confident that the Liberals would gain and they would gain, or at the very least maintain, then they would have no problem calling an election. But again, that's kind of speculation, so you don't know for sure. Um, but again, that's another thing that shows that Canada is pretty much, I think, finished as a country. Like, I don't know how much more damage can be done. And that the big problem, like I say, is the fact that I don't think there's any way you're going to convince enough people to vote them out. And that's the problem too, is that even if the Conservatives get elected, it's highly unlikely that they do enough to change things, right? Like especially under O'Toole. Like if Sloan was leader, I would be somewhat confident. If Lewis was leader, maybe, but not O'Toole, and for sure not Mackay. Um, and that's the big problem in Canada right now is that there's no hope. Like there's no hope, and like the only hope is Wexit. But the problem with Wexit is that I think it's close to a majority of enough people would support Wexit. But the problem with Wexit is I don't think it would go through because the mainstream media would commit to attacking it like 24/7 pretty much, and I think that would be enough to probably sway enough people's minds. So that's the problem with Wexit. And there's many problems I think with Wexit. But again, not that I don't support it. I'm fully if there was a Wexit vote tomorrow, I would vote for it in a heartbeat, and I would try and convince as many people as I could to vote for it. But that's not the problem. The problem with the problems in Canada, which I know that's kind of a weird way of saying things, but it's not necessarily what is the solutions to fixing all our problems. The hardest part is convincing the average person, right? Like it's the thing I brought up with climate change, and what O'Toole brought up is, he talks to all these people and they're like, their big one of their big things is, oh, what are you guys going to do to address climate change? Well, this is the problem, that the only way the conservatives can get in is by having some big, crazy, stupid climate change plan. So that is the problem. And like I said, the solution to climate change is pretty much nothing. We should repeal the carbon tax. We should repeal many regulations. I do believe that maybe a small amount. I mean, I'm not a big believer in regulations in the first place, but there's no way you're going to convince people of that. So I do think that a small amount of regulations may be a good thing, but the problem is that you're not gonna convince enough Canadians to vote out the Liberals unless your platform is keeping the carbon tax, or having something that's pretty much the same as the carbon tax, which is pretty much the conservatives' way about going about things. That they know that the carbon tax is incredibly unpopular to their base and to anybody with half a brain, I would add. But they know that they're not going to convince enough people that are, fence sitters to vote for them if their policy is nothing. So that's an example of why Canada is pretty much finished. Is pretty much finished because there's again, the problem isn't what is going to fix the problem. The fix the problem is getting rid of the carbon tax and replacing it with nothing. But because again, we were perfectly fine before a carbon tax, right? Like, and not to mention too, there's more than enough definitive evidence that points to the fact that a carbon tax does nothing. We know the BC government's own numbers. They've had it in for what, 11 or 12 years now, and it's literally reduced emissions by like 0.1%. Like, it's almost not even measurable. So we know beyond a shadow of a doubt that the carbon tax does nothing to prevent um, to reduce carbon emissions. So anybody with half a brain would look at that and be like, "Hey, we need to get rid of it because it does nothing and it costs people money." And again, I hear people also make this argument of, "Oh, well, people get more money than they lose from the carbon tax," which again, I've never seen anybody do a cost benefit analysis of that, because I think that the average family would be well into the thousands of dollars that the carbon tax costs you in a year. And not to mention too, it's almost impossible to track too, because how do you know exactly how much food producers and trucking companies are raising their prices because of the carbon tax? Do you know exactly? Like, my guess is that there's no way of knowing exactly. From some of these industries, maybe. I mean, a trucking company would probably just tack on whatever the carbon tax costs to the fuel, but how do you know how much the company that built the truck tacked on to build the truck? How do you know how much, the food, to make the food, to package the food, like all of these little things? Like, how do you know how much the farmer was cost to harvest the grain and to take it to the elevator? And like, I don't know if there's any way you can possibly figure out exactly what that number is. So I think anybody who's trying to tell you that, oh, the average person gets more back from the carbon tax than they get taken out. But again, how do you know that? How do you know that? And I've never seen anybody provide a actual example of that. So, and I think the simple reason that, number one, there's no way of knowing, and number two, I think it's rather obvious that most people don't get more out. I think the only people that get more out are the people that are either very young and don't, consume a lot because they don't have to, or people that are very old. Like, I know I have a family member who's in like their 80s and they live in a nursing home and they're getting the carbon tax credit, but obviously they're contributing next to nothing. I mean, aside from heating, like that's pretty much all they because they don't drive, they don't have their own house, they don't buy their own. I mean, obviously they have to have food bought for them, but still, like, so again, there's a very small percentage of people that actually get more back from the carbon tax than get in. But again, that's kind of a diatribe. So getting back to the main point here, um, I mean, number one, how do they keep getting away with this? And the question, and that's a question that a lot of people are asking. And the reason for that is that um, people are so partisan nowadays, especially people on the left. They tend to live in echo chambers. Let's just be honest about it. And again, nothing can change their minds. Like, nothing can change their minds. Again, they'll make the same argument. Like, they'll make the same argument, but they're wrong. They're right to a small extent. I mean, I do think that there are some conservatives that are going to vote conservative no matter what. But if the left was right, then Justin Trudeau would have been voted out last election. Like, um, a guy running on, I'm a social justice warrior, racism is this big issue, and but I wore blackface more times than I can count. Still, like, what was he at, 2 or 3 ethics violations going into the last election? I mean, he's added another one onto that. I mean, not officially yet, but there's no way he won't be found guilty of this in any sane world. So yeah, like, if the conservatives were as partisan as the left, I mean, number one, conservatives would have just voted for Scheer blindly. But the problem is that a lot of them didn't, because they knew Scheer wasn't actually a conservative; he was more of a moderate. And that's another reason why the left is completely clueless, because they thought Scheer was this radical conservative, when in reality he wasn't. Scheer was as far to the left as a conservative has probably ever been in Canada. Um, but anyway, yeah, that's pretty much what I wanted to bring up today. I mean, just craziness, and the fact that the mainstream media is basically the entirety of their coverage of this has been to downplay it, just shows in what a terrible position we are at as a country, that you know the government can do this kind of stuff and pretty much skate free, pretty much skate free. um, and that's where we're at in Canada. Again, like you talk to the average person, and it does, you know make me a little bit happy that there is some people that are aware of this kind of stuff, but most people aren't aware. And here's the other problem too: is a lot of the people that are aware of the craziness, they're the kind of people that just don't vote, or they vote for like the PPC or someone who's never going to win, right? So that's the problem. That's the problem, is that the people that tend to be the most aware tend to be the people that are, or not 10, but a lot of them that I know are the least politically active, like as far as voting goes. Like they definitely know their stuff when it comes to politics, but their position is, yeah, they're both bad, I'm not going to vote for either one of them, right? So that's the problem. So yeah, I mean, I could talk about this kind of stuff forever, but again, the main point, like I say, that if Trump has, things that he does that turn out to be complete bogus, complete hoaxes, and the average person thinks less of him because of stuff that's a complete hoax than stuff that Justin Trudeau literally did do, that if anything was worse than what we initially thought. And yeah, like I've heard people say, "Oh, I'm so tired about hearing about this we thing on the news." Like you're tired of that, but you're not tired about hearing about the whole fake virus, complete scam, the virus that's slightly worse than the flu. Yeah, that's what you want to hear more about. Yeah, like I just can't stand the average. No, it's not that I can't stand the average person these days. I can't stand the beliefs. I can't stand the worldviews. I guess is a better way of putting it. So anyway, I'm going to leave the video there. If you liked it, make sure you hit that like and subscribe. Make sure you follow me. Make sure you like. Make sure you subscribe. Check out those links that are in the description, and stay tuned for more.